let's talk about how you choose the right development agency to build your MVP. So, up to this point, you've been doing a ton of work planning, researching, making sure that what you're building is actually worth building. Now it comes to the point where you actually have to execute with someone. And the trick is, if you don't pick the right person or don't pick the right development team, you're going to run into some major issues. So, I just want to give you some shortcuts, some things that I do that make this process, to me at least, much easier. So first, identify the complexity of your build. So really, this is just a range. There's low effort and there's high effort. And we'll go through kind of some examples of each. So on the low effort side, there's white label. White label means there's software that already exists, and all you have to do is take it, swap in your logo, select some features. Maybe there's certain things you need, certain things you don't need, whatever, and then you can activate it. You can start making revenue quickly. Some of these are very basic, like you can white label a CRM, or you can white label a community app, right? Because whether you're building a community for your church or an anime community, it doesn't really matter. You're still building a community. You're still meeting up. You're still having online events. You're still sending messages, stuff like that. You move one over, you get to low code. Low code is basically more of an open-ended, pick your own adventure type development. Typically, this is drag and drop. So this is like an editor where you go in, you want a drop down here, you want to switch to a page there, you want them to be able to have a user profile. You're really like picking and choosing off of a menu, and then of course moving things around as best you can in order to make it something quick and easy and more accessible. Basically, they've turned app development into its own SaaS, right? Which is great because then it means more of you get to actually build things. Now, no code is good if you're doing something simple and if your goal is testing. Now, if you're trying to do something really complex and you're trying to make it the forever system, you probably don't want to start with no code or even low code, because both of those have certain, or potentially have certain, limitations in scale, in features, in integration, what have you. Technology development, it's one of those every puzzle piece doesn't just fit together. And sometimes you can make two pieces connect, but there's a lot of expense in the middle if you don't do it properly. So I'm always really cautious when I'm picking a solution. Am I coding into a corner? Am I making decisions today that I'm not fully understanding the consequences of down the road? So if I'm doing no code, great. I want to test, or maybe my goal isn't to make it a big, giant, huge startup with VC investors, whatever. I'm just trying to capitalize on an idea, maybe make a couple $100,000, maybe make a few million. Like, you can do a lot with white label. You can do a lot with no code. You can do, of course, a ton with everything else, but you don't need to kind of overstress the other areas as far as low code, simple build, and complex builds. Those are more appropriate for startups that are trying to get VC funding, that are trying to grow, scale, and exit, as it were. But going white label, no code, and sometimes low code even, depending on what you need built, can often be very viable, up to millions of dollars a year in revenue. Just a question, again, of what are your longer term goals? Now we get to low code, very similar to no code, but with a few more bells and whistles, as far as it typically gives more features, more customization options, whether it's integration or even just UI, UX, to advanced users. So people that know how to code already and simply want to use something that's a bit more, user friendly, where they can just drag and drop 20 things they need and then build in 5 things they need, versus having to build all the 25 things from scratch. Now you get to simple and complex builds. Simple builds, these are the 5K builds, 10K builds, 30K builds, things that, of course, cost a good amount of money, but it's not hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's not 6 to 12 months. It's typically in the neighborhood of 3 to 5 months, depending on how expansive your scope is and, of course, how efficient your development team is. From there, you get to complex builds. Now, complex builds, I typically don't advocate for. It's really annoying to be waiting months and months and months to launch something when a simpler version could have been launched so much sooner, and you could already be learning things versus just, twiddling your thumbs, waiting for tech questions and waiting for more QA and waiting for more UI, UX decisions. It's wasting so much time when you could be capitalizing on value immediately. So when you're looking at your business, you got to figure out, what does my MVP require? If you can get it done with a white labeled solution, that is the best way to go in the early days. A very easy example of this, I have a former client. He used a white label solution, made $1 million a year, then took some of that money he was making and invested in developing his own application, more of a simple / complex build, and started building things out. And guess what? He didn't have to go raise capital for it because he already was able to finance it himself using the white labeled solution. White label was a couple grand a month. He was in healthcare, so it made sense. That was easy for him to afford. So then he was able to afford that, turn a couple thousand in expense to a couple million or, $1 million in revenue, and then reinvest that. And now, of course, the business continues to grow and scale. So the simpler you can make it, the easier. Also, I tend to think about it more in the context of startups waste a lot of money, right? Startups waste millions of dollars very often building things that they don't need, that aren't user wanted or validated. So I'm never worried about having a couple extra, even 100 grand of dev expense, because I know I'm never going to outspend some of my startup counterparts, shall we say. I tend to be just a bit more cost conscious than that. I never worry about having to backtrack, meaning, okay, yeah, maybe I have to build this low code or simple build thing one way, but if I get enough validation and enough capital and enough revenue to kind of get things moving, I can always double back and then make this complex thing. I can always earn that revenue back. And yeah, it may cost me 50 grand, but that's 50 grand lost to unlock potentially millions of dollars. Like, to me, it feels like a very easy trade-off because I'm confident in the long game. But if you're very nervous, then obviously even spending $500 can make you very nervous. So the easier and cheaper you can make your MVP to build, meaning keeping the complexity low, the better off you're going to be. Next, identify multiple development agencies. This is just the golden rule. You never go with the first offer because everything sounds good if you're a good salesperson. You can have horrible development agencies that the founder just has great people skills and therefore they make 500 grand a month, right? But all their customers are pissed. And if you don't do the right due diligence on them, meaning check them out and make sure they're legit and quality, et cetera, then you're going to be, again, one more horrible customer or one more very unsatisfied customer in their bucket. This is something that as you continue to have more conversations, as an example, you go into the first meeting and you ask them, hey, how long would it take for us to build this? And how much is your average fee? And what kind of problems do you run into? Can you give us an example of some of your work, et cetera, et cetera? And then as you have those conversations and then you go into the next conversation, new questions will emerge. Maybe even some of the questions that pop up in conversation 2, you want to go back to conversation 1 and ask them, because now that's more relevant. That's why it's something that you don't need to take months to get this process done, but you don't need to rush to hire a developer over a weekend. You do yourself a huge disservice and really ramp up your risk if you make decisions like that. There's a time for making quick, fast, snap decisions. Early stage development, when there's no time pressure functionally, that's not the time to do it. Quote, price and experience. This is super important. High price doesn't mean high value. There are certain people that are just exceptionally good salespeople. And guess what? They can sell you a $10,000 website build, where if you found someone just as competent as the person on their team that was actually going to build it, it would cost you $2 grand. $3 grand. And hey, sometimes people sell a whole customer service and user experience, blah, 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 that they would argue is worth the extra fee. I try to keep things fair, which is it should cover the cost of the hours and then it should make them, somewhat of a profit, because of course they're not just doing this for charity. That's why I always, and this is for titles, this is for seniority, this is for price, this is for brand aesthetic. Just because it looks good doesn't mean it is good. Just because the person has a senior title doesn't mean they're competent. Just because the price is high doesn't mean their customers are satisfied. Always be cautious and go, hey, if I'm spending 10K versus 2K, I need to be getting 5x the value. Because if I'm not, then what deal am I doing here? Am I just bad at negotiating for myself? Like, why are you paying more for less? You want to avoid being the guinea pig. This is a big reason why I try to find development agencies that have experience more in the business model. I'm less concerned on the industry unless the industry is very compliance focused, e.g., if I was doing cannabis, if I was doing healthcare, if I was doing fintech. I want to make sure that they've built one or a few of those things before, because I don't want this to be their first time and oops, they missed that regulation and oh, it's just a $50,000 fine. That's fine. It's like, that's not the game you want to play. And it's also not the game you have to play if you just ask them the right questions, right? However, if it's more of like a general industry, insert, consumer tech idea or random small business idea that helps them with their, order management in some capacity, right? Some supply chain, something that's just less regulated, more of a simple build in that way. Then I'm more concerned, do they have experience in the business model? Meaning like e-commerce. Have you built websites that move product? Have you built a marketplace that connects people efficiently? Have you built a SaaS where people log in and download stuff, or there's integrations? Whatever the requirements of my build are, both for the MVP at a minimum, but again, ideally you get the MVP done, you test a bit, and then you start to expand on it. These are the people that are going to help you expand on it. So if they are comfortable, or they should be comfortable building and doing the types of things that come next in the product pipeline, meaning if feature 3 requires X skill and they don't have X skill, well, you're going to need to find someone to build feature 3 if you really need it, right? So there's a trade-off that comes with everything. And it doesn't mean that every dev shop's going to be perfect, but it means you should find the one that presents the least problems and the most, progress. My always ask questions. These are the questions that in one form or fashion, I ask every development agency and in a lot of cases, other service providers where appropriate. So first, have you built apps like this before? Again, this is a big effort and don't be the guinea pig. I want to see that you've done it, right? Show me proof. Do not just trust proof, arbitrarily. And again, just because someone is really good salesperson, I've been on dev diligence calls and we ask for a case study and they play it off like it's beneath them to send a case study because they're just so validated. It's like, okay, great. Well, you can sell to the next sucker because it's not going to be us. Because if you're so big and great, oh, you're telling me bigness and greatness that you haven't put together a case study that's ready for potential leads? That doesn't sound so big and great, does it? So there's always, again, refutations to their horrible, points, but that's a good kind of canary in the coal mine, letting you know, if they don't even want to show us case studies or they don't want to give us critical information that could be really helpful in our decision-making process, then maybe that's a bad sign, right? Maybe you should trust them when they mistreat you or when they don't, do the things that seem so normal, especially if you've spoken to 2 or 3 other agencies and they all provided that. And now this one doesn't. That's interesting, but you wouldn't know it's interesting if you didn't talk to the other 2. Again, I repeat myself, but I promise it's because there's so much here and it's hard to remember and it's hard to execute on all this stuff, but I want to keep it as simple for you guys as I can. Ideally, in a perfect world, you can talk to one of their former or current customers. That way you can see, do they like working with them? Are they working with them long term? I just did this a few weeks ago for a development agency for one of my clients to see what their long-term plan was, because my client wanted to work with this development agency long term if they could. They just wanted one pony. Is that pony till death, and away you go. So I had to make sure that this development agency had those abilities, both now and, through scale. How have those apps and teams performed? And apps is general here. It could be any product. If you're doing this with a design company, then it's the same kind of idea. How have those products performed? What have you? And the reason I talk about teams is because very often performance is broken into kind of 2 major buckets. Bucket 1 is use, in terms of, are we getting revenue and are we getting people to use the platform and are people extracting value? And here's this KPI. and the other is capital. Because very often, of course, in startup land, startups are out there to go raise money. So a big validation of how good the development was, hey, we used our first round check or our first friends and family money or our first, personal investment to build this MVP. We went and did X, Y, and Z. We tested this, we learned that, what have you. Now we're raising this next round, and using that MVP, they go out to investors, angels, venture capital, friends and family, whatever, and they go raise another 2 million. That's probably a pretty good sign, because that means either the investors were impressed with the tech or the tech was able to be impressive, meaning users were using it, revenue is being generated, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a good sign. Of course, the number one thing should be, do customers like it? Is the team satisfied? Are they getting their questions answered? Are things, working professionally well? Great. Capital, though, is a big kind of, it's too big to not address. So I want to make sure I say it, because people do measure a certain level of success against it if you're in the capital space. And to be clear, it's not about how much capital you raise, it's are they able to raise the capital they need. If they raise 30 million using the MVP, great. That's obviously good. If they raise 500K, obviously raising 30 is more impressive than raising 500K, but functionally, it's like, I don't care. I just care that they raised capital because that's what they needed. Oh, they're checking the box mentally for me. If I build with them, the product will be sufficiently good enough to have users to do this, to raise capital. Success. Next, what is your typical relationship with clients long-term? Again, I touched on this very briefly, which is you want to make sure that if you're, getting in bed with this group, that are you in bed for forever or just for the night, right? Is this an MVP that you're going to be building with them? They hand it to you and they move on. There's lots of development agencies that do not like long-term relationships, something to be a little suspicious of, if you ask me. But there are plenty that don't. They just want to build the thing and move on to the next thing. That's their goal. That's what they do. They're kind of churn and burn development agencies, as it were. But if you're in the market, if you're shopping for a long-term partner, a long-term relationship to help you build this, solution, then you got to make sure that they've done that before. Again, if you can avoid being the guinea pig, you really want to. And luckily, you can avoid being the guinea pig more often than not by just asking questions. Number 4, identify comms, relationships, and timing. How often and how do they communicate? Clients have different preferences. I have some clients that they want everything to be on the phone and everything to be like a Zoom. They like the face-to-face. They want you to show them stuff, and they're willing to pay for the time, right? An hourly fee, whatever, for you to do it, but that's what they want. And if your development agency isn't willing to give you that and that's what you want, well, you're probably going to be pretty frustrated after a couple weeks or a couple months, or especially when you start running into issues. And now the method of communication and kind of the nature of the relationship, whether it's can you text them, can you call them, are weekends off limits, what's the short notice, like depending on all of those, do they communicate via email only, via text only, via Slack only, synchronously, meaning at the same time, asynchronously, meaning they record videos and send it to you and expect you to record videos and send back. Notice there's like 20 different questions here, but fundamentally it boils down to, are they willing to work with you in the way that you want to be worked with and communicated with? And if not, then you have to either get on their program, compensate them for getting on your program, or find someone else. Fair enough. What is the timing on deliverables and flexibility to changes? I will say it is a very rare day that startup founders don't make tweaks even through the development process of the MVP. And you want to make sure that the development agency you're working with, that there's wiggle, or that at a minimum you can pay for the wiggle. Some people, they scope their product and that's what they're building and they're handing it to you, and the end, right? You got to renegotiate for new stuff on the new contract. Others say, here's the scope, and if we have to add anything we can add up to 20 hours extra for odds and ends that you need built or added at a fee of $150 an hour, right? Whatever the deal is. But notice there's a little bit of wiggle. Once you start adding too much, they end up wanting to rescope the whole thing. But the question is, do you have any wiggle on timing, whether you can give them a new feature and then have it pushed an extra 2 weeks and have that new feature built out? Are they open to being paid more? Is there a dialogue about timing and ongoing fees and ongoing edits? Because if you don't have that early and know what's acceptable, you're potentially going to be very frustrated when you want something and they don't want to give it to you because that's not how they work. I believe this is last. Review legal contracts, kick off, and monitor. Now, this is really important when you're dealing with all the legal. Remember, them just sending you an invoice and you paying it is not like a legal contract. It's not just, you don't want to just trust the stuff they send you. If someone's building something for you, something where there's potentially intellectual property being generated, you want to make sure that's protected. You want to make sure fundamentally you or your business own that. So making sure stuff like your intellectual property is assigned, because he who built it owns it unless the contract says otherwise. So if you hire this development agency and you don't have IP assignment, meaning you're giving them money, they're giving you the IP and assigning it to whatever, then the little random developer that typed all this stuff, yeah, they own your product until you pay them for it, because that's how that works, right? You have to make sure that agreement has it and everything is built out properly. Another good example of this is scope. A lot of founders will give very vague directions to developers, and developers are happy to keep it vague. That way they can, but the problem is founder has expectation A and developer has expectation B of the same line item, and this one is way lower, way less hours, way less effort, and this one is 10 times more hours and effort. Well, guess what? The developer's just not going to do it, right? And you already signed the agreement, and unless you're going to go to court or try and argue with this developer, you're going to pay it, right? There's going to be issues. So this is why making sure the scope in that, what do you need? How many features? How many buttons? Like, what are we building? The more clear you can make it, the better off you're going to be. And again, this goes to that whole wiggle room where you want to make sure that they have a willingness to have a little bit of wiggle, but you're specific enough to make sure that they're wiggling a little bit on individual line items. It's not you gave them 3 bullets and now the wiggle is, enormous because you didn't even bother to really write a scope. You just wrote like, we want a front end marketplace with 3 website pages. We want these 2 features. It's like screenshots, details, functionality of the features, like specifics for your business, like own the outcome a bit, please. Kick off and monitor results. This is really important as far as make sure to be quick to call out issues and also make sure to not be one yourself. Issues are, hey, you said you were going to deliver this by then and you didn't. Hey, I was expecting a message by here, but I didn't get one. Hey, you owed me this and blah, 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 or we didn't get that. Make sure you call out things. Sometimes people just need a little reminder that, hey, you're holding them accountable. Other times it's a sign of problems yet to come, right? And their unwillingness to work or a disinterest in your product or just poor quality of execution, whatever it might be. The other side, and this I have to be fair, clients are very often a problem themselves. They get something and take 6 weeks to review it, and then they complain that it's late. It's like, it's not late, you're late, right? This is 100% your fault. And in fact, you should have to pay the developer more for being annoying, right? It's like, you got to own the relationship and realize that just because you're giving someone money doesn't mean you own them. Doesn't mean your deal goes infinite and they'll just drop everything at the drop of a hat to do it. If you're paying them 10x their normal client, yeah, maybe. But if you're building a little MVP for 5, 10, 20 grand and their normal projects are like full builds of 100K, 500K, they'll still service you, again, assuming they're a good agency, but you shouldn't assume you're going to get 500K service for 50K spend. That's not fair, right? If you were them, you wouldn't take that deal. So again, balance the relationship. If they're not charging you a ton and doing you a favor because they view long-term with you, be quick on the responses. Be thankful when they give you stuff. Be clear with your feedback. Don't waste their time or your time doing lazy work. That's not a win for anybody. And there we have it. So hopefully this gives you a better picture of what it's like to actually go through and have these conversations with development agencies. And of course, a whole bunch of the different items and questions and concerns and thoughts that come up along the way. fundamentally, what I would make sure that you do is ask every question that you are nervous about, because better to ask and get a good or bad answer, meaning one that goes your way or doesn't, than just hope and remain in the dark. Make sure to get a number of quotes. That way you can actually get something that makes sense and get a fair deal out of all this work. And make sure to be involved in your process. Make it easy for your developer to do good work for you, because then you both win. If you make it hell and then they deliver something horrible, everyone's upset at the end. And it's all about the effort that you put in during, before and during the process.